why I no longer call myself a Christian, right? So for me, this is the very quick and dirty version.
How dirty? Are you talking about
So
butt
dirty.
plugs?
No, butt plugs. No, they're not. Butt plugs are not in the Bible that I know of.
Actually,
Is there one in your anus? Yeah.
No? Or the jewel
Okay.
on
I'm
it?
just
What are you
saying
talking
he
about?
does. It's a thing. Never mind. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
I like that. I've always wanted Soul Boom to be a podcast where you can talk about God and butt plugs
Well,
in the same conversation.
you've done it.
So
You've accomplished
It has been inserted into the conversation.
yeah.
That's good.
Go ahead,
Sounds
Rhett.
good.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Any further interruptions have to be butt plug related. Okay.
Don't hold it in.
So, I think that ultimately, the Christianity that I inherited, not just from my parents, but culturally that I inherited, right, is a post-Enlightenment sort of modern Christianity, which in many ways Christians took the bait of the Enlightenment and Protestants especially, and we're like, we have to prove this, and so we have to have an apologetic, we have to have a defense of our faith. We have to say that the Bible is true in everything that it speaks of, not necessarily literally true. There's like different views of like the days of creation or whatever. But ultimately there is some truth in that it has been revealed in the Bible itself and in the person of Jesus. That's a huge claim. And the exclusive revelation of God is in the Bible and in the person of Jesus Christ, right? Like the main revelation, right? If you're Catholic, okay, there's church tradition, but whatever. It's the Bible is the main thing. So I took that as something that, if that's true, that's the most important thing to know, in terms of knowledge. And then when I began to really dig into that claim over the course of 20 years, really, starting in college, but then, I've continued on doing that. I still do that. At some point, I became convinced that this was much more man than God, this enterprise, what had made it into the Bible and what we understood about Jesus, even when we think about the central claim of Christianity, which is the death and resurrection of Jesus, right? And you think about what we have in the four Gospels. Well, Mark, the earliest gospel, we don't have any post-resurrection appearances. But, then we have Matthew and we have Luke, and then finally we have John, written most recently. And in this gospel, we have Jesus claiming to be God. We didn't, if Jesus claiming to be God in the flesh is such a central element of Christianity, how come the three other guys didn't decide to talk about this in an explicit way? And so basically, in looking at it, you see that it feels like a religious movement. It feels like a framework that people created around a real person who said real things, and some of those things are preserved or whatever. I got to this place where I was like, what am I having faith in? And I had to kind of push it all away, because I was like, I can't decipher what parts of this are true or not, and I can't decipher what's the difference between this faith and this faith over here and this faith. They all seem like the enterprise of man trying to figure out and add some structure to whatever this, and understanding to whatever this thing is, right? And so for me, that was disconnecting from it completely. I went through a little bit of an angry atheist phase or whatever, but just from a philosophical standpoint, the idea that there is some purpose and meaning and intention behind the universe is something I want to believe. I think I mostly believe it because I want to believe it. I find some of the arguments, from design or the fact that there's something rather than nothing, some of the stuff you talk about in your book, I find somewhat compelling, but I can have like a really smart atheist sit down and break them down, and I'm like, well, okay, that's kind of convincing. Then you can have a really smart theist come over here and be like, oh, that's kind of convincing.
Sure.
So I find it's less about coming down on one side of the fence of that argument, because it's not like I'm going to be in the middle of a philosophical thought and be like, find God in that, if that makes sense. I feel like if God exists, then connecting with that God is going to be something that happens on a different level than just some rational thought. So that's where I find myself right now is, okay, what does spirituality look like? And I'm in the middle of reading a book by this woman, Brittany Hartley. She has a book called No Nonsense Spirituality, which I think is actually the name of her like TikTok channel as well. And she is an ex-Mormon, highly educated and kind of has done the deep dive herself on a lot of these things. And where she's ended up landing is in this place where spirituality is incredibly important. But there's a lot of people like her, and I think like me, who have a difficult time buying any bullshit, for lack of a better word, right? And so what she says is like, there's all these really useful spiritual tools that religious communities and traditions have come up with that are essential to human flourishing. Community, ritual, service, purpose and meaning. Her theory is that, people basically, we created these things for ourselves because we need them, and we can still have them without having to have the belief in the grand narrative that you may, like if you're like me, have a difficult time buying into. But that doesn't mean you just become a atheist who's like spirituality isn't important. So I think I'm in the middle of figuring out what does connection with those essential aspects of the human experience, which might involve connection with some kind of mind beyond my own, but I may not ever be able to define that, and that's okay. I'm in that.
Yeah, in that search, in that journey. Yeah.
He's ripe for reconversion. Right?
Yeah, he really is. He really is.
Go for it.
I mean, here's what I'll say. I don't think that one needs to conceive of God in terms of the Trinity. And I don't think the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit actually holds water when you look at the Bible itself. And I think that was created hundreds of years after the death of Jesus as a understandable and convenient way to try and understand divinity. Because here are these Christians going, wait. He calls God the Father, and he says, I am the Son. He says, I and the Father am one. Does that mean he's God? And they're just pulling their hair out. What is that? How does the Holy Spirit? Did his body literally float up to heaven, or did his spirit float up to heaven? No, his body had to have left the tomb because it was seen floating above, and a bunch of people saw it. Et cetera. So there's these debates going on, and they settle into these kind of definitions of God, circa the year, 250, 300, 350, right around then, of, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And the miracle of the resurrection then becomes kind of the most important thing about Jesus. From my perspective, and it's a little bit of a Baha'i perspective, the resurrection of Jesus is one of the least important things about Jesus. What's important about Jesus is what he said. And how he lived. Yep. And the fact that he referred to the Father and called himself the Son of Man throughout the Bible. So if you jettison a lot of the dogmas that came up hundreds of years later around Jesus, yes, there's a flurry of comments going like, Rainn's wrong, and here's why, and here's the quote, and this is blasphemy, and he doesn't understand it at all, and he's misinterpreting and stuff like that. And I get that it would turn off most Christians. But if you boil Jesus, his life and words and message down to its essence, I still believe that there can be divinity. There can be a metaphorical Father and a metaphorical Son, not literally a virgin birth seed and not literally a body floating back up to heaven. By the way, this whole thing with bodies is really interesting, and Alex O'Connor talks about it. Like, because part of I think Book of Revelations, where the bodies will be uninterred from the graves and all float back up. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, does our spirit go up, and is there a tunnel of light and we see our ancestors, or do our and if so, how old are our bodies when they float up? Like, I'd like to be 32.
Well, and that's
I don't want to be 58 when I float up.
And that's why some Christian traditions, they don't like cremation, because, I'm not that God couldn't somehow reassemble those ashes, but make it easier for him.
If Star Trek can, God can. So, right? But you know what I'm saying? Would it be possible for the two of you to jettison any and all dogma and go back to the core essence and try and find some kind of spiritual truth in the Bible and in the story of Jesus that isn't necessitated by these other kinds of definitions? Because you said the most important thing, the resurrection of Jesus. No, the most important thing about Jesus, love thy neighbor. That's the most important thing about Jesus.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah. Not floating zombie bodies.
First of all, I think that there's a lot of Christians who are living like the way that you're describing, first of all, right?
Okay, yep.
And there's a lot of Christians, interestingly, these are the Christians that I would have said were not real Christians, right? Now, as a 47-year-old deconvert, the idea of the resurrection being a metaphor is much more beautiful than the idea that I have to believe in a physical resurrection, that it really did happen. If it's a literary creation for our own edification, that's still a beautiful thing to me. I am trying to figure out what does it mean to engage with that.
The Soul Boom Podcast. Subscribe now on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you get your stupid podcasts.